GAB Talks by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olzak. Today, we will be speaking with Don Berg, author of Schooling for Holistic Equity, How to Manage the Hidden Curriculum in K-12, winner of the 2023 Independent Press Award in Psychology and a distinguished favorite in education. Don is a psychologist with more than 20 years of experience in leading children in self-directed educational settings. He earned a degree in psychology from Reed College in Portland, Oregon. A researcher, alternative education practitioner, leader, and author. Don's work has been published in numerous journals, and he has presented at conferences worldwide. Don is the founder of Attituder, LLC, and the executive director of Deeper Learning Advocates. This is my favorite part. A self-proclaimed recovering faux achiever, Don joins us from the joyful Llama Ranch in West Lynn, Oregon. Wow, that sounds gorgeous, and I would imagine it is. Congratulations, Don, and welcome to the GAB.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here and to have this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Well, it's really great to have you. So let's start from the top.
Okay.
Why is the American school system in crisis? What do you see as the problem, and what's the solution?
Yeah, so my perspective on the challenge is one that's not the usual academic scores are this way or that way. My perspective is more about how the people in the system, the students, the children, the teachers, are actually disengaged. This is not new data. The Gallup has well documented that both teachers and students are disengaging from their experience of what's going on in the schools, which is, of course, if you're disengaged, then you're not learning as well as you could be, learning or teaching as well as you could be. And so it turns out that psychology knows about how motivation and engagement work. So engagement is a very solvable problem. In fact, the Carnegie Foundation put out a big report out 2015 that specifically said, the achievement gap, that's a big problem. That is a challenge. But the engagement gap is both more pernicious because it undermines fundamentals of learning, but also it's more solvable because psychologists have a real good understanding of how engagement works and what we can do to change it. So the challenge, and we're starting to see some data in coverage of some mental health challenges that are going on in education right now too, with the students, particularly adolescents. That's been a long-term trend, but now it's getting some more attention that it deserves, and it's something that is probably worsening. So the challenge is really around one of the fundamentals of learning, which is the engagement piece, and we know what to do about it. So that's where my book is one that yes, we're talking about a big problem in education, but it is a very solvable problem, and more solvable than what's mostly getting the attention, which is these scores and test scores and grade things and academic achievement. That's important, but we can solve a more fundamental problem more easily. So that's the fundamental problem is if people are disengaging from learning and teaching, then that's just not giving us as a society what we expect of our education system.
I agree with so many things that you said. I think there is a hyper focus on grades. And I have two teenagers, one who's going to college in September, and there's such a focus on scores, test grades, and I think they're definitely losing that love of learning in the process. Right. So Don, how to, and the mental health crisis in the schools, that's a whole other topic. Maybe that could be the next book as a psychologist. So how, Don, do schools become a place where both the teachers and the students become passionate again about learning? How do we get there? What's your model for that?
So the key thing, first of all, is it's not something that the teachers and the students themselves are going to solve alone. It's they're the ones who are being disengaged, but they're not the ones who shoulder the responsibility for solving it. The responsibility lies with the policymakers, with people at higher levels, and policy occurs at the principal sets some policies, but this district, the state, there's different levels of policy that are going on here. It's what I call the hidden curriculum. That's that piece in the subtitle. Is the hidden curriculum is something that we have known for 100 years that it exists. John Dewey mentioned it in one of his books many years ago, not by name, but he was getting at the idea, and not to,
What is it?
So the hidden curriculum is this piece. It's where brains interact with policies to create limitations in classrooms. That's really what this hidden curriculum is, and so we need to shift those policies. Now, part of the way we need to do that is we're a society that just loves data. And data is a good thing, but you need the right data. And that's one of the challenges we have, is that we've been focused on this academic data, which I said is important, but you need to focus on some more fundamentals in how that data is being produced. If you're producing data that is a little bit off, you're navigating in an inaccurate way. So, it only takes a 1% deviation. If you're going from Portland, Oregon, where I am, to Hawaii, 1% deviation puts you hundreds of miles off course if you're, going down the road. So we need to get those fundamentals of the psychology of learning put into policy. So that's the real key. In the book, I do have a policy proposal that basically acknowledges what psychologists have been saying for decades, is that there's some fundamental aspects of learning that are dependent on basically just psychological needs.
In fact, if I can interrupt you, we're all familiar with the model back to basics, the traditional one.
Oh, right. Yeah,
writing and arithmetic. So this sounds like you were going to start speaking about your holistic back to basics. As you said, the academic is important, but being human in school is also. So tell us about that and how it ties in.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the strategic plan, is what I call Back to Basics 2.0. Now, Back to Basics 1.0, which was really those 3 R's you mentioned, but it's also kind of strict obedience to the teacher in the classroom and no nonsense, no frilly things. And part of the problem is that the way that's usually understood is as if the psychological stuff is not important. So it focuses on academics. Now, like I said, that's important, but you need to have some prerequisites in place first. And that's where I get to my Back to Basics 2.0. Is the Back to Basics 2.0 is really the enabling the school to set up an environment in which Back to Basics 1.0 could be effective. That's an interesting question. I don't know if it'll be or not, but it certainly makes sense. But first you have to have the 3-part Back to Basics 2.0 is first teach governance before academics. So, and actually teachers already do this. They just don't have the emphasis on it that it needs. So governance, like when the teacher says on the first day of school, what are the rules in our classroom, or says here, these are the rules. Either way, either the kids decide or the teacher, someone has to decide, what are the rules? What are our expectations? What are we doing together? The problem is that if that's limited just to the first day and then we just go on, and don't involve the kids in figuring out how to work with that, either they make the rules or they figure out how they're going to work with those rules. So that's the first piece, is really emphasizing governance before academics, so that the academics can then be facilitated. If you look at really high performing teachers like Rafe Esquith in Los Angeles, I think, he was recognized. He's had a documentary film made about him. He's actually been pushed out, like a lot of teachers who get movies made about them get pushed out of systems. But the important thing is he's had a long career in the public schools, and what he emphasized was getting kids online, and then you can do amazing things. You invest in the beginning in these governance pieces, and then you can really take them far once you get going.
So Don, you haven't. I want to just bring back to this. You have an interesting background. You ran a micro school in the 90s.
That's right.
From what I understand, long before it was fashionable. And in fact, in your micro school, you said that the decisions were made by consensus, which is what you're saying. The teachers can have that governance the first day, but if you don't continue with that, it becomes a challenge. But in your micro school, you said that there was a consensus. So how did you do that?
So first of all, the context in which I was working, homeschooling other people's kids, was very different. So I had a smaller group of kids, and we had the freedom to explore the community. So a lot of it was emphasizing I had them making decisions every day, important decisions for them. about what should we do, how should we do it.
Mhm.
You know, we would do things like go to the library, go to the parks, go to the museums. You know, we had a lot of opportunities in our community every day. So that's just one way of organizing it. Classroom teachers can do it. They may not have as many options, but
Mhm.
they can still help the kids make choices. And the key thing here is that these are choices that are important to the kids. Is not any arbitrary choice is going to be psychologically supportive. It has to be the choice that they value, that they find really important. So you can start to, and particularly at younger ages, it's really easy to say, okay, well, let's figure something out. It could be within the context of an assignment, you know, just how are you going to do this work? Or it can be what work should we be doing? What should we focus on? And it can work either way. The challenge is really, how can I make sure that I'm giving them participation opportunities that are meaningful to them, and then using that to then move forward with, if you know, teachers sometimes have to do academic stuff, then go ahead and do that, but make sure that you're including them in some way so that they feel like, oh, okay, who I am really is really valued, because that's one of the psychological needs is relatedness, also autonomy. So both making choices and making sure that there's a relationship within those within which those choices are being made.
How do you know what is important to that child?
Listen to the child is important.
Right, which we don't do often enough.
That's right. That's right. And it's hard when you're in a classroom. I have done some classroom teaching, so it's not in a formal classroom in the same way that classroom teachers are today. But I have done large group of stuff, so it is more challenging. But that's why governance is also can be thought of as building those relationships. How are you really ensuring that those kids are being heard in some way, making sure that they have participation opportunities. Kids will respond to the opportunity to participate, even if it doesn't go their way. They appreciate the fact that they can participate. So that they fit together.
Right, right, like a puzzle. So you
Right,
seem
right.
to be, you've championed schools that you admit are on the margins of the
Yeah,
schooling industry. I think
that's right.
examples that you use are movies based on true stories that we've probably all seen, Dangerous
Yeah, yeah.
Minds, Freedom Writers.
Mhm.
And you see these relationships develop in these schools. Tell us about that and the importance of it.
Yeah, actually, it's really, in my way of thinking about those Hollywood movies, is there's one thing that Hollywood gets that actually the school system doesn't seem to, and that is that it is largely starts with relationships. Now, the teachers themselves, I'll get it, but the way the system is organized, you know, if you break up a relationship every year, like, why would you do that? That
Right.
doesn't help, you
Exactly.
know?
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways that these movies get it right, is it's built first on a relationship, and then you develop the expectations that'll take them further. Like you
Mhm.
push the kids. So this is one of the things, the ironies of the way that a lot of education politics run, is you have sort of conservatives who want education conservatives, which can be distinct from other kinds of conservatism, but you know, they want the strict obedience, and they want the teachers to focus on what the content that needs to be taught. And then you have the progressives who are like, oh no, but this can be really unfair to certain kids. It can be a real challenge, you know, in ways that are deeper. They're both right. And that's the irony of it, is that they both have an element of what is right. And so we need to figure out, how do they actually work together? And that's the emphasis, is you need to get them into this context where they're really, the schools that I actually champion are ones that are radically different, in the sense that they have the
Mhm.
kids making choices every day, like I did, but
Mhm.
they have it in a large group, like, you know, kids, a couple of hundred kids together making choices, defining the rules, and then enforcing those rules as well. So they're both defining and enforcing those rules. So these are very different kinds of schools, and they don't have, the particular schools I'm thinking of are don't have academic requirements. In other words, the kids can choose to go to class or not, but they're always making choices about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And
Okay,
they
that's
do learn
interesting.
to read, and they do learn the math, and they don't know those things.
Okay.
So it's not like they're not handicapped by this. They actually discover that they can make decisions. And you know, kids actually are smart. They figure out, oh, reading something I need to get along in this world, and so they figure out how to do it, or they get someone to help them do it. They take classes. Actually, most kids in these schools take classes of one form or another. They just don't, you know, have to, but they choose to, because kids are naturally curious. kids are naturally impassioned about they'll find their passion and start to pursue it. And turns out that when you pursue a passion, there's probably no passion in the world that doesn't require you to read at some point. Even if you're doing something that doesn't seem like it does, but there's a guide, there's somebody you have to read, it's going to happen. And so when you give them the opportunity, they actually pursue those things and discover the deeper mechanisms in the culture that allow them to do those things.
So you talked about the two sides of the debate, the equity debate.
Yeah, that's right.
So what is holistic equity then? What do you consider holistic equity?
So holistic equity is looking at equity in a lens that takes the equity piece and really defines it clearly in terms of needs. So the progressive side, who are typically considered the champions of equity, say, well, there's all these unfair outcomes. And so that's problematic, which, okay, that's fine. But then the conservative side says, well, wait, if you use academics or outcomes as the sole means of holding people accountable, then you run into all kinds of problems. And they're right. Okay. So once again, we have kind of both right. And so the problem is that if you define equity entirely in terms of outcomes, you get those problems. So part of what I'm doing is drawing on a National Academy of Sciences definition of equity, where they mention needs in one of their three defining statements. And I say, oh, okay, that's the thing. But I, add a little bit to it by saying needs need to be the bedrock of how the whole definition works. So I put needs into all three statements. But if you define it clearly in terms of needs, particularly the ones that are scientifically validated needs, the needs for, the psychological needs I mentioned, but, air, water, food, shelter, those things, and the psychological needs, then you have something very clear that you can use for accountability that doesn't have the problems of vague outcome-oriented things. Is you will change those outcomes, but you're ensuring that there's a good, solid, objective foundation for how you're going to proceed for accountability and for how you're progressing. So that's really where it comes down, is if you define it in terms of scientifically defined needs, then holistically you end up getting at these different levels. So holistic means multi-level. So you have to think about not just the individual, but also the school, the group, and the society. But when you think about all those levels, it has to start with an individual getting their needs met. And then that individual is going to contribute more to their group, to their society, by having their needs met. That's what the psychology says, is that, when we observe humans, it turns out that when you meet their needs, they are really into contributing to their society. It's not an individualistic view. That's why it's holistic. It's not just, what's unfair to me, it's what works together. And so that's a bigger picture on equity, but it's bringing it into a more precise definition that can then be more useful as a society.
So John, you've said that your goal is to make deeper learning become the norm, not the exception.
Yep.
So folks that are listening to you right now, the leaders in the industry that you're speaking to, the educators, the principals, the policymakers, in a sentence or two, how can they get started? Like you said, Hollywood has it down. How do we get started?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing, just the policymakers need to start thinking about how do you get needs recognized as this foundation to learning. That's where the policy proposal in the book really is about, embedding that policy, the needs in policy, so the policy stops undermining the learning. So that's what they need to do, is start getting educated about, okay, how do the needs work? What are they? And how do we put them in the policy so that becomes a way that they can be held accountable for what's going on? So that's where there's in educationese, the word is climate, is what is the classroom and school climate? And so there are already existing measures for classroom climate, but typically the Youth Truth and Panorama, and there's some other ones that have apps and things, is the information is gathered once or twice a year. And it's like, well, teachers need a little more information than that. If you're adjusting once a year and you're changing your class every year, they're like, that's not really actually that helpful. So one of the things I've developed recently after writing the book was a climate measure that's actually formative instead of summative. So it's something that teachers can use. They can measure it 1 week and 2 weeks, make some changes based on that. and then 2 weeks later take another measure and see, okay, what's going on. So that is available on my website, holisticequity.org. It's called a climate tool. And so if they can start to really focus on ensuring that the children, like teachers, can actually just go in and say, okay, let's make sure the children's needs are being satisfied. And principals can do this with their staffs as well. Same instrument would work both ways. So really getting a data stream in place. So that's where the policy comes in. Is this? Yes, I have a tool that teachers can use independent of kind of a policy. But if the policy's not there, then that's not going to have the systemic effect that we want. We need to have the policy in place that, one, acknowledges needs as crucial to learning, and then two, enabling data to be collected about how those needs are being satisfied, and empowering teachers and principals to start to make changes to how their school works to better support those needs.
Don, have you heard any feedback from policymakers, educators about the plans in your book and about research?
So this is a brand new thing. So it's actually I get feedback a little bit because it's really interesting. Policymakers, like, it's really interesting to. I go to conferences and present at conferences quite often, and so I was at a state boards of education conference, and it's funny because part of the way I wrote the book was assuming that a lot of challenges was at that level. And I go to talk to board members, and they're saying, it's not us. It's, and they point to another level in the system.
Of course.
And that's the irony of it, is that this is where the hidden curriculum, it's a hidden piece, is there are enlightened people, so to speak, everywhere in the system. However, they have challenges in ways that it really is not easy to do the right thing. And that's a big challenge. And so that's part of how we have to shape policy, to begin to say, okay, we need to acknowledge some of the basic things, because all the well-intended humans are trying to do better, but we need to align them with a more precise understanding of what those foundations of learning are and how to better support them. And that's going to take both top-down and bottom-up efforts to really make the change happen.
For sure. I had an experience with my older son. He actually, and I'm sure you're familiar with this term, Don, he looped a couple of times with a teacher.
Yep.
So, and that goes back into you're establishing these relationships with students, which are creating a more passionate environment, but then you abruptly stop and they have to start all over again. So the looping was fantastic for him, because he continued with this same teacher over the course of 2 years.
Exactly.
So, but there are challenges with that, challenges coming from policymakers that don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And that, there's a variety of ways to do either looping or having. One of the schools that I studied was one where, instead of everyone being assigned a specific teacher in classroom, like for all day, for the younger ages, they work more like community college. Is that you just put out a slate of offerings, and those things, the kids can pick and choose. Now that requires, once again, some interesting challenges, but that's the thing, is looping's one way to do it. Doing offerings, or having a slate of classes that kids can pick from. There are a variety of ways to do it, and there are schools that are trying to just enable age mixing across broader ages as well. There's a program in Washington that I'm in talks with, trying to figure out how to make that work. So there are a variety of ways to do it, and that's where it's really important to have both that top down and bottom up. Is that the bottom needs to be able to say, hey, here's what's going to work for our community. It's not going to work for everybody. None of it's going to work for everybody, except the needs support themselves. But if you figure out how in your unique community, what is it? Is it looping? Is it offering a classes, variety, and what do they call it? The menu of options. There's different ways to do it. So there's different ways that communities can figure it out and make it happen for their community in their unique way.
Right, because each community is different. Exactly right. So you have an interesting background, John. Well, first of all, I love the fact that you say you're a self-proclaimed recovering faux achiever.
That's right.
I want you to talk to us a little bit about that. But so you completed your undergraduate degree in psychology 25 years after you began.
Yeah.
Not lack of intelligence, quite clearly. So what happened there, and what is a faux achiever?
So fauxachievement is the process of doing what needs to be done to get the grade, but not actually learning it, not retaining, not mastering the lessons that were actually taught.
So just rote memorization, for example.
Well, it can be rote
Memorize.
memorization. That's one way to do it.
Okay.
I'm terrible at rote memorization, so that was not how I achieved my fake achievement.
Okay.
For me, it was I would pay attention enough to kind of learn. I figured it out when there was this math class that I had. I had Mr. Schuster. This is at Long Beach Polytechnic High School in the '80s, and Mr. Schuster, I learned I learned enough to pass his tests. But the next year, I was taking the assessment at the beginning of the year with my new math teacher, and I failed it so utterly and completely. My teacher was just like, threw up her hands and was like, I have no idea what I can't teach you. I can't teach you 2 years at once. Now it turns out that I had taken the SAT the prior year at the end of my year with Mr. Schuster, and didn't do as well as I wanted to. So I was determined to take it again in December, because that was the next time it was offered. So I had taken this assessment, and she said, okay, and she handed me SAT preparation manuals. And said, just do, and so I was in class, independent study. I was studying how to take the SAT.
Right.
Well, all my classmates were actually studying math. Now, it's interesting because, in English, so SAT has English and math, right? So when you take that, you would think that being instructed in English during that time, I would have learned more about English. So my English score should have improved more than my math score, because I was actually being instructed in English. But I got more than twice as much improvement on my math score without studying math, because I don't know if you know, but SAT preparation manuals do not teach you math. They teach you how to take a test.
Yes, I'm very familiar with it. Yes.
Yeah, if you have teenagers, you probably
My daughter's starting college in September, so we're real familiar with that. Yes.
So that is clear evidence of fake achievement.
Okay.
I did not learn any more math. In fact,
you learned how to take the exam.
I only learned how to take the exam.
Right.
And yet my score improved more and I was in a college preparation program. Okay, so they know how important the SAT is. And that English class should have been doing a lot more to prepare me for taking an English exam I improved on both, but I got twice as much improvement on the math side.
So is it safe to assume, Don, that you're a big proponent of the new current policy sweeping the country, that the SATs and ACTs are optional?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think it's
all
something
these
that
colleges are taking holistic approaches. They're all taking, that's what they're doing.
Right, and that's absolutely right. Is that the SAT has largely been a brainless way of eliminating more. So big fancy colleges have the problem of having too many applications that they can possibly wade through.
Right.
And so if you can just arbitrarily, based on a number, say these kids don't count and these kids do,
right,
that saves you a lot of effort. Okay?
But they've done away with that now, and now they're finding that it's big business. But that's a whole other topic of conversation. But I guess it's safe to say that the test scores are kind of poster children for faux achievement, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely. That is the point.
Yeah.
And so there's, it's not that the exams don't do anything, they do some things, but you really need to be clear about what you're trying to achieve by having them take that exam. So that's the thing where if it's just it is unfair just to simply say, based on an arbitrary number, we're going to not even consider a bunch of people. If you have to have a way of regarding people as people, like, okay, they have a unique history, they have a unique opportunity, and some of them are going to take the test well and some aren't, and that does not reflect their ability to take advantage of a higher education opportunity.
Exactly.
it reflects other things. So you have to find ways to do that. And that's the thing that making test scores an arbitrary cutoff is just blatantly unfair. But it also, they have to then figure out other ways of wading through so many applications. And so they're going to still have, to look at grades and say, okay, we're going to have an arbitrary cutoff for grades, which grades are a better reflection of something. They're not perfect either. But that's a problem that the higher education people in the elite institutions, yeah, sure, they've got a problem, but they shouldn't impose that. That shouldn't be the solution for everybody in the system. And that's part of the problem, is that
Absolutely.
Each institution needs to have some way of handling their issues, and arbitrary cutoffs is one way that some schools are going to do that, but not all schools should be doing that. And so arbitrarily saying it, all schools should either have or not have the SAT is, that's just not good policy. That's not good human education either. So
human education, that's a big focus of your research. Now
absolutely.
you did do your, well, let's get back to, so what happened in between the 25 years? What was going on there?
That's right. So I did, with my improved scores, I got into an elite college. That's, Reed College, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And so, but that was me on the rails because, I was, obviously, if I'm in a magnet program and taking ST and everything, I'm on, smart enough to be considered intelligent. But that was just riding the rail. Like, I didn't know what else to do with myself, so I went off to college.
Right.
But 3 years later, and I, did okay enough to stay in for 3 years, and then chose to pull myself out. So I dropped out of college in '89, I guess it was. But what I dropped into, the only reason that even worked was because I had a sense of passion about working with children. Is that in each summer before going off to Reed, I had this job at a summer camp in the mountains in Southern California, and I found that I was working with the probably 7 to 12-year-olds, and I was just like alive and passionate, and it was interesting and engaging, and like the exact opposite of school.
I'm sure a lot of high schoolers would agree wholeheartedly.
Exactly. So for me, I actually became a certified professional nanny.
Wow.
I went to school. I dropped out of Reed and became a nanny.
Wow.
So that was my like, okay, I'm going to figure out, I'm following this passion to work with children, and I went to nanny school, and then I was like, I did a little bit of that work, but then I was like, you know what, that school age, that 7 to 12 years old, that's my sweet spot. So that's how I ended up homeschooling other people's kids, was like, how do I work with the kids that are really interesting and exciting to me? In babies are great, but they're not my jam. That's
Right.
not the
Agree.
thing I really want.
Yes.
So how could I do that? And that's where I ended up homeschooling other people's kids, and then did a variety of things. Now this was in the '90s into the early 2000s, and I didn't work out a sustainable business model. Now it would be a lot easier today. You can see that there are a bunch of programs that micro school programs, because now that's a thing.
Yes.
And so yeah, if I had the internet and a bunch of support, that'd have been great, but didn't work
But
it
there
out
was
at the
no
time.
such thing then. There was no.
Yeah, exactly. Wasn't a thing.
No.
So that ended up transitioning me to doing a lot of different things. And then when the economy crashed in 2008, I kind of questioned, like, what's going on? So I went back to school, finished my degree. Just because part of the thing was that Reed itself had changed, and now there was a professor who studied motivation in educational settings. Like, that's what I want to do.
That's what.
And that's what I've been doing. Yeah. So and I did my study on a couple of those radical schools, a couple here in Portland, Oregon, that operate where kids are completely at choice. They get to choose what to do and how to do it and who to do it with, and found that they actually maintain intrinsic motivation across the years, which is completely different from all the mainstream schools that have ever been studied over the last 3-4 decades in which studies like this can be done. Is that in traditional schools, motivation and engagement decline.
Mm-hmm.
In these schools, it's at least maintained, because kids are naturally curious.
So. Do they still have the same class size in these non-traditional schools?
That entirely depends. So the one of the schools that I studied, as I said, did more of a community college model, and so class sizes were usually pretty small. Mm-hmm. But it all depended on who showed up, how much demand there was for the course. They'll pack people into a room if that's class is popular enough.
Okay.
But also the teachers have the option of saying, I can only handle X number of students. And so that'll be the limit. And then you have to wait for another time to do it. So there's a lot more freedom for the teachers in that kind of model. They're respected as professionals and expected. I asked the teachers specifically, I interviewed teachers who had experience in both their alternative that I was studying and more mainstream schools. And every one of them said, I'm more respected as a professional. If they had experience in both, it was like, I am just respected as a professional here, because when I go, like this one teacher said, she had come from the mainstream system, and she was hired into this the homeschool alternative resource center, and said she decided she wanted to do a knife making course. Okay, this is serves kids down to elementary, like this is a pre-K to 12 school, right? So she's going to offer knife making now. And so she was like, okay, I got to prepare, a safety plan, and I got to contingency plans, and I got a budget, and so she prepared. And she goes into the executive director and says, okay, I'm going to do a knife making course. And then she says, okay, what do you need?
Really?
And it's like, what? Wait, what?
Wasn't expecting that, was she?
Exactly. She was floored.
Yeah, I bet.
And because the executive director knew that this was a consummate professional who knew her work, who knew her job, and she knew that knife making for kids is like,
yeah, of course, yeah.
And so she's gonna prepare, and she's gonna take these kids seriously and ensure that they're going to do so safely.
I bet it was a very popular course.
Yeah, I actually don't know how well it did, but yes, I know that she as a teacher was there for many years. I think she's moved on from them now, but I still follow her on Facebook. But it's it's one of those things where the demand for classes can really alter the dynamics. But that's also an interesting piece of it too, is like, if you're offering something and kids find it boring, they're not going to come back. So you're not going to have the show. And so when we talk about school choice, it's like, yes, there's an important piece for parents, but let's think about kids making choices in school, and of what classes to take and things like that. So
yeah, because if they choose something they're interested in, they'll be successful in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or they'll realize that they have challenges and limitations and seek out help.
Right.
They're not dumb.
No, they're not. Both is positive. You're right about that.
Yeah,
so you do have some experience, as we discussed, in leading children in non-school settings, but you don't have a teaching degree or teaching credentials, really. So why should folks read your book, 400 pages, and then some, listen to what you're saying? That's an investment.
Yeah, it is an investment, and the reason is basically comes down to, I did study. What I'm offering is psychology, not pedagogy. I'm offering to say I have studied this deeply for decades, and to the getting a degree, writing a thesis, getting published, and so the what I'm offering to educators in particular is a deeper look at some aspects of the psychology of learning, and what are those fundaments to enabling that to happen, not from an academic achievement standpoint, but from a human learning, how do we engage with life and get a better grasp on reality kind of learning. And so that's what I have to offer is a deeper look at what is this fundamental learning thing that we all expect to have happen. And it's true, not just I will observe from some on high place and decide what these kids need or what these teachers need, but when you really think it through, it really is the teachers have those needs, the principals have those needs, everybody, all the humans in the system have to have these needs, and it's cross-cultural, it is truly universal. And so what would it mean to shape the system to serve those humans rather than just serve a system of an economy? We're more than in our economy. We are humans with bigger pictures, like there's more to us than our loyalties to a party, or our loyalties to a country, or our loyalties to a school, or our loyalties to our mascot or a football team. There's a lot more going on in schooling and education. And so how do we encompass that wholeness And that's the holistic part as well. How do we think about all those things and honor people for where they're at?
Well,
In addition to
fantastic.
holding high expectations for where they're going.
Well, that's important, is where they're going. We're shaping that now, aren't we, as
That's
educators?
right. That's right.
It's a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it to all the folks out there who are listening. Don, what's the most important lesson you've learned in life?
So I think it really is recognizing the humanity of another, really looking out and seeing, oh, who is this person? You know, a lot of my study stuff goes into universal needs, like we're all the same in some ways. But that's true, but it's not what makes us who we are. What makes us is how do we meet those needs? Like if I look at you as someone who has autonomy, well, your autonomy is going to express itself in putting together a book award. Like, wow, you must really be committed to literature, way more than I am.
Yes.
I'm committed to psychology, and I had to write a book to do it. But that's really like, oh, okay, our worlds meet in some way. And that's true of every human being, is our worlds meet in some way. We don't necessarily know how and why, but somehow our worlds overlap. And if I can look out and see and see this other person as, wow, you're amazing because you're doing something that I would never do. And that's true for a lot of people, for everyone else except me.
Well, Don, you're amazing. And your website
Thanks.
is chock full of information. I mean, there is so much in it and so much to learn about and so much to listen to and to read. And I see you have it up there, holisticequity.org. So is that where folks can learn all about you and all about your book?
Yes, yes. And like I said, I have tools up there for the teachers to be able to do a formative assessment on their climate, and lots of other things too. There's the videos on almost every page, because I really want to share my passion and my interest in how people are in the world.
So Don, lastly, what's next for you?
So my focus right now is is getting this tool to be useful. I literally just released it just a few weeks ago, and so I really want people to play along with it and learn, figure out how to use it, and really make a difference in your own classroom. And this is something that doesn't run into problems with the data because it's anonymously responded to. So that's a key focus, and I'm actually going to several conferences coming up in various places. I'm going to the Self-Determination Theory Conference in Orlando. I'm going to be going to Kathmandu and Ireland, and
Wow.
you know, I've got a lot going on, but I really want to encourage people to you know, take this tool, use it, learn more about these primary human needs and how motivation and engagement work. And yeah, everything is available at holisticequity.org.
Well, looking forward to hearing the feedback that you get from folks looking at the tool and utilizing it. And Don, your work is so important and eye-opening. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next time on the GAB Talks, we will be speaking with Steve Procco, author of Rebel Correspondent. This is your hostess, Gabby Olzak. Until we meet again, keep on reading.